Good morning, everybody. Calvin Dekker here. Now that I know I'm not presenting in the afternoon from this morning's opening session. Hey, good morning then. Today we're going to be going over the Application Studio, kind of the next step. Now, Andy took an awful lot of thunder out of my presentation because while we talked about knowing who's doing which topic, we didn't know the content. So Andy hit like 3 of my slide decks. So I've updated my presentation. We'll kind of talk more of the advanced items and how to handle the differences between 22, 21, and go in a little more of a deep dive on the components that we have. Is everyone able to see my presentation?
Yes, we are. I see the Application Studio, and now your next slide, basic form layout and editing.
So, basic form layout and editing, we hit the system management, we go to Application Studio. Andy also let us know from our little triple dot ellipse, we can also get straight to Application Studio from the applications. Kind of like we used to be able to go tools and go straight to customization. So, either way you're comfortable with, you can do this. Adding fields to the forms is kind of pointless for us to do since Andy's already done and kind of gave us that demo. One thing I didn't ask Andy, are you still on the line?
He dropped off.
Okay. We'll double check with him, make sure that everything's okay, that we can share the video to the session. This was Andy's first presentation with the group, so I wanted to make sure that that was okay. So I'm not going to recapitulate the adding fields to the form. We saw how easy it was to add the objects and then set the data binding to the table and field or the BAQ view and the field there. But I am going to dive a little deeper into the components, the properties of the object, so that you know what is in your tool set to play with. What was in customization mode back in earlier versions is a whole lot different than what we have now moving forward. As they made it more of a no-code or a low-code solution, you have to do a lot more clicking around to find the object or the object or the object or the object, drilling all the way down to get all the way through the properties. Don't ask Fred, otherwise he'll give you an explanation of what object-oriented programming is, and they've taken it on steroids. So for our Application Studio, when you enter Application Studio, you have the ability to filter what you're looking for. So if I don't want to do my development from customer entry and choose Application Studio open, I can also go into the Application Studio, look for the object I'm looking to do. I can filter for types, and I can look at when was it last updated. If it's something that came out with the default Epicor, it's going to have an older date. You could turn around and just say, hey, show me the ones that I built since November 1st, 22, and those will filter down and show you here. Clicking on the plus sign will show you all of the layers that you have built for that customization. On the right-hand side, we find our pencil, the same thing that Andy was using before to edit the actual item. So once we click the edit of the layer, you can't click the pencil button for the actual UI screen. You have to click on the layer to choose to edit. Other things that we have here is you can personalize the columns here. You can export this grid now to Excel. Most of the grids allow exporting to Excel in the new Kinetic 22. You will not find this the same in 21. We also have the option to clear all. We can view the customizations, but otherwise, once you select the screen to edit, it's going to go ahead and open that Application Studio and application map for that object. So I was going to demonstrate in customer shipment, just adding a field for number of packages to the ship detail line. I'm going to kind of skim over that because adding a field to the screen is, as we saw, it's fairly simple to do. If anybody thinks that that was a little bit difficult, go ahead and put a message in the chat window, and I can go ahead and still go through customer shipment, adding the node, adding the panel, and then putting this item on there and customizing it. The application map gives you a layout of all of the tabs, panels, and groupings that the screen is going to have. Over on the right-hand side, we're also going to see the slide-out panels. These are panels that pop out from the right side of the screen, not necessarily panels that are in the main part. If you want to build a slide-out panel, you can add your panel there as well. It doesn't have to just be on one of the Epicor tabs or panels that are currently out there. When Andy was demoing, we added fields, or he had added fields to panels that were there, or added a panel grid to a panel that was already out there in a tab. You can also do this with your slide out panels. Depending on your UI interface for your user, are they using a handheld? Are they using a tablet? Are they using a full computer with multiple monitors? This determines how you want to build your UI. The smaller the screen that they're using, they have a smaller footprint of what they can do. So slide out panels may be a little bit cumbersome for the handheld user or for a cell phone user. With the layout, then we also have the rules to apply. And Randy showed us we have data rules. I can have row coloring. I can have groupings. I can have different things happen when that data occurs. And, you know, color code it. Make it useful information to the user so they can see that information right up front. There's also calculations with the data rules. So if I need to do a basic calculation, box quantity or the shipping quantity divided by the parts per container to know how many boxes I need. Those calculations are simple things that we can apply to the rules and then display that information to the user with the data. So the same way that we bound the table and field, we can bind these calculations that we build through data rules or through the rules panel. We also have the events. Andy didn't hit the events too much, so I'm still going to keep this one out there because I don't know anybody that doesn't use a basic message box to communicate to their end users. So that one I left into the presentation. We'll kind of cover over that. But I can set up events. These events, Fred is also going to talk about because this is where I would call functions. I can pop up a message box. I can clear the form, run a calculation. This lovely one, I can load a URL. When Andy was demoing, he was in the web browser-based version of Kinetic, not necessarily using the smart client. Using the smart client, towards the end when we were doing menu deployment, he'd gone ahead and pulled it up there. You can choose where you want to run, web browser-based or smart client. If you're going to use a classic form, it's not going to show up in the web browser yet. Those are only for the smart client. And then he had also mentioned publication history. So how many times have I edited this? What have I changed as I've gone through the iterations on this customization? Or this layer now, we're not really calling them customizations, but when I make this layer, what are the changes that I made to it? As I've said many times in customization sessions, leave yourself a breadcrumb in that description window of what you did, why you did it, who it was for, and when it was made, so that if you have to ask yourself 9 months later, who do I have to go back to and see if this is still a needed layer that we have to be managing in IT. Definitely go ahead and do that in your personalization publication history. When you select an item, you're almost always going to get the properties to pop up. As I was saying, line details, you can change the caption here, change the information. The page caption did have the ability to add some of the information regarding it. Not sure if the customization or the layer names are available to add that into the caption, but that may be possible. Next one, I'm going to kind of cover over some of the major components or all the components that are out there that you have the ability to put on a layer. So we have a 1-column or a 2-column object. If I want to have like a text box or a label and then the object, I would turn around and have a 2-column. If I just want to have the field and the title of the field by default now shows in it, do I need to add a label for every text box or object that I put on the screen? Text box now are more of a message to the end user rather than a label of what the field is for. Because the field's going to show you its label until you click into it. The address format object is out there. If anybody is working in multi-country environments, the address format in Germany is different than in the US. It's different in China than it is here. That address format, there is a built-in component, so you don't have to add, as you did in the past, the 5 different text boxes and then a city, state, zip, and the format. So this format now comes as a standard object that you can just put onto the screen. The button, probably the most used customization tool inside Epicor, and that's literally just putting a button on the form and having the button execute some code in the background. Andy was talking about using a Boolean. The checkbox is a great way to set a Boolean. So this is a yes, no, true, false type question. Chip lookup, I'm just going to kind of hit through a few of these. The color picker, if we need to select a different color. The combo box is going to be based on a BAQ or a static list of items that you can type into the combo box. When the user hits that field, they have to select one of the options from within. The container would be kind of a group. What you used as a group box could be a container. The currency box would be a numeric editor with decimals for currency that will follow the decimal settings you have under company maintenance. So if you specify a 4-digit currency, you're going to have 4 digits in our currency. The currency selector would be choosing what currency you want from the currency table. The date picker automatically pops up a calendar. It allows the user to navigate, kind of like the date field, or almost identically to how the date fields work currently. The file selector allows the user to go pick a Windows-based file and pull back the UNC path and file name and save that. So the file selector allows you to go out and grab that. The folder selector 2 down, or 1 more down, allows you to pick a Windows folder and save the folder name to the field. So if anybody's looking to add additional file links or give their users the ability to add links, you'd probably end up using the file selector rather than an old text box. The fiscal year suffix, I generally recommend not using this. Once you start using a fiscal year suffix, you are locked into using it with Epicor. but this will allow you to pick the last 2 digits for the fiscal year. The foreign language description, I can turn around and put fields out on forms and then give the user the ability of a field to put in what the foreign language is for that item. The GL account editor, based on your GL account structure, what are the mandatory and what are the optional fields? This GL account editor automatically opens up the dialog for the person to enter the chart, department, division, product group, whatever you're using for your GL structure. There is a GL multi-book editor, a GL control panel. So if we need to add a GL control to something, we can. The data grid or the grid would allow us to put a grid on there and then put items into the cells on the grid. The group box would be a grouping of items. So do you want to have a grouping of items or do you want to use a panel? The panel would be on the higher level, like customer detail, and then maybe a grouping box would be the address, the sales and commission, the taxation. Those would be groups that I would want to keep those fields together while yet I have the panel be all of the information. You can still add a label. I have not really found where I add a label nowadays in the Kinetic Screen. It's pretty much, we just put the label right in the field and save the landscape. Similar to a combo box, there's also a list box. The list box is kind of like your attribute window where it'll show you multiple items the user can select. And then when they select an item, it moves over to the selected. So serial number selection, attribute selection, these are considered the list box. There's a multi-view calendar that's an enhanced calendar similar to the date picker. There is a navigation link. So if I want to go straight from part entry over to time phase for that part, I can add a navigation link that goes straight over to time phase. In 22, you're going to find there's more context menus that have been added to the system. So you're going to find the ability where you can right click on a part number and say open with this area. This is much more enhanced than what was in 10.2.700 and what was in 21. Okay, Matthew has posted here that labels are probably the most useful for static label that contains a color based on the status or a field change. That I would normally put as a row rule and just have the whole object itself change its color. We can do that with a label, but I would probably, rather than apply the row rule to the label and the field, just have it apply to the field map. Next one is a numeric box. This is for integers. Integers, decimals, whatever I'm putting in, it's going to be a numeric value. Epicor, the UI object, is not going to allow characters to be typed in. So an order number has to be a number. Output print format. So let me take a look here. On PO entry, having a little label saying approved or closed, like on the classic menu. That can be done. I would definitely say yes, then have a label that says approved or closed, and then you would see the checkbox yes or no if it was turned on. You could also do a picture box for that, Matt, and then show the graphic of the approved versus unapproved. That may be also a way to do that with a picture box, and then control which picture is shown based on the value of the field. The panel card, Andy already showed us. I can go ahead and put a panel card in there. Inside the panel card, I can put my group, collect my fields into the group, specify a 1 or 2 column item, add a grid inside there. There was also the panel card Gantt for scheduling information. I also have a panel card grid, which is where I would put like a BAQ. The BAQ result sets would autofill into the grid. So it may be easier to use a panel card grid rather than a regular grid. The part revision description, I don't know why they added a separate field just for this one field. There's an object strictly for part revision description. The picture box, if I'm using images to store for a part and I want that image to print on the paperwork, I can display that image in a picture box. If I allow a file selector for the user to select an image, I could turn around and display that image inside the picture box. The quantity UOM is based on the UOM system. Radio button is another way kind of to do a Boolean, but this is more if I want the user to pick from 3 or 4 different, and they can only choose one radio button for it. So it can go beyond the Boolean of a yes or no and say, okay, go ahead and select, do you want 1, 2, or 3? And then we'll store the value based on the radio that was selected. Sometimes people use the radio button interchangeable with like the combo box. There is a row navigator object, so I can move between order detail lines, order releases, the same row navigator that was on the navigation panels that Epicor puts on, you can do the same row navigator. So if I turn around and had that panel card grid, I could do a row navigator to move between the rows and the data that came back from the panel grid. The scheduler, so I can add a schedule to items, and you can build your own custom schedules now in 22, and I believe it was in 21, where you can build your own schedules and add items. So I can access that scheduler object from this object that I can put on the UI. I have a selection list. Similar to the file selector, I can also have a server file picker. For anybody that's in cloud, they're probably going to use a server file picker to go back to a server rather than necessarily having access to everything on their workstation. The shape, sorry, let me head back here. The shape object, Matt, could also be the green or red dial for if the PO is approved or unapproved. I believe shapes are what they used in earlier versions of Epicor, and then they just changed the shape instead of changing a picture. I can still have tab controls. Tab controls become a little bit more difficult if I'm using a cell phone, because the cell phone is going to be more apt to use the panel because I can collapse a panel easier than I can collapse a tab. I can tag information on the screen, and I have an object for tagging. Text area is a multi-line text box. Now, in the past, you could turn around and have a text box and set the property to make it multi-line and say how many lines they got. There's now a text area that will come with built-in scroll bars versus a text box where generally it's one line of information. The time picker is going to allow us not only pick a date, but pick a time on that date. We have a token date, and then we also have the ability to upload a file. So if I need to select a file and select the folder that it's in, Once I have it, what do I want to do with the file? I may want to roll that up to DocStar. I may want to roll that up to the file server and attach that file to the item. This is how I would turn around and upload the file inside Studio. There's a component that has that for it. Now, every one of these components, as we saw with Andy, you click on the group, then you click on the behavior, then you click on the advanced tab. Each one of these goes down further and further. I know in the past somebody had always asked for a customization objects and all the properties and methods that you could do with it. I'm sure someone's going to request the exact same thing for these components in 22, but I don't have a lot of hold in faith in someone actually writing all these down, because as we discuss more today, you're going to see between 21 and 22, even the objects are changing. They're updating and changing all the time. So any document that would be made would only be for the moment. In addition to our components, we also have user-defined custom objects. You can add your own user-defined objects to Epicor if you're super savvy and want to build your web controls. You can build these yourself and then call that into the program. You are not limited to what Epicor is handing you here. There are also widgets, and I foresee many people sharing their widgets as they continue moving forward. I expect we'll probably see like an EDI widget for people that aren't using EDI OneSource. There's a website widget right now where I can display a URL into a web widget, and that will open up the web browser and take me straight there. So similar to our customer shipment entry or tracking tracker, there was a button for display details or details for the shipment that would open a web URL, enter the tracking number, and display your proof of delivery. That would be a website widget that could be added. I would expect to see Salesforce widgets coming down in the future. Concur for expense and receipt tracking. We're going to see more and more widgets as people get further and further into the software. Components on the toolbox. Right next to it was user-defined, and then we had widgets. Any object that you select in the toolbox will have a properties page. Hey, and we have the object properties. Now, I pulled this up just for the text box. So I have basic object properties, the ID and the label. As Andy said, UD underscore, whatever you want to call that ID is perfect. That will always keep it separate and outside. Behavior. When the person does a search, when the field blurs, when they create a new record, I can trap those events when this field gets clicked up. I can enter comments regarding that field. Why did I put it there? Who was the person that requested it and the date that I created it? Leave yourself a breadcrumb as to why you put these custom objects on your forms so that you can evaluate years in the future. Do I still need this? I always say that years in the future only because I know people that have been using Epicor for more than 20 years and really wish they would have done that back in the 1990s. I have a time to take my meds. We also have the data tab, which is where I can specify the key field, the epi binding, and if I want to do a search for it, what my binding search description will be. So this is where I bind the data of the object to either be a key view, a foreign key view, or a base data view that's behind the screen. The layout is an object. But rather than controlling the data in the object, this is controlling the object. So do I want the object to be right aligned with my grid that it's in or within my panel, or do I want it left aligned? It's not the text or the data that's inside the box, it's the actual box itself. The width of the object. And we will find this becomes a fun nuisance for development, getting the screen to look proper, making sure the width of my text box matches the width of the text box above it so they're kind of in alignment. Do I make sure that they're both left aligned so that they're in a nice clean vertical column? These are things that are going to take people a little time to learn, which is thoroughly fine. Give yourself some time to do this. The state of the object. Can the user personalize it? Can they customize it? When they personalize the object, they can do on a personalization layer what fields are displayed and hidden. That's above what you put on the layer, which may be the layer that we deploy to all users, but now users can still put a personalization and customization on top of that for themselves. Is the object hidden? Is it disabled? Is it read-only? And when the form loads, does it autofocus? Do I want this field to be the first field they get to? There are also advanced properties for these objects. For this text box, we had a max length. Can they type in an 8 character, or is it a 35 or 50, or are we going to give them 5,000 characters? You control the precision and the size of that field. There is also patterns. Yay, finally. We always had to do this as a regex expression inside customization to make sure that somebody entered the zip code as 5 digits and 4 digits if the country was USA. I can now specify what those patterns are as an advanced attribute to my object. Does it have a floating label in front of it, or does it just disappear and you type in the field? Autocomplete, autocorrect, and auto-capitalize. I know it's crazy to say auto-capitalize, but we can finally put these types of things on a text box to make sure that all data goes in the proper way. Nobody turns around and types in all capitals on the city today, and next week it's in camel case. Spell checking is an advanced feature that can be turned on to a text box or a multi-line text box. I can have the system turn around, automatically check that the user typed in the right information, and have them right-click to turn around and validate the spelling. I can also add to that dictionary. So if there are words, SQL, Epicor, you want to add these possibly to your dictionary because these are things someone might type in the field. Do I enable a search? Is it a search only? So I can have a field, but if I enable search on that, now somebody can search on that field in the search window. So if I'm adding a custom field, I don't have to write a BAQ to show them or an advanced search where they can put that in. I can now turn around and add that as a property on the object in the advanced section. And the other one, masked. Very similar to the pattern, I can specify a mask of a phone number as 3 digits inside 2 parentheses, then 3 more digits, a dash, and 4 digits. Now, if the person doesn't enter all of the information for a phone number, it won't save it. So I can turn around and set up the mask or the pattern and ensure that my data is going in correctly into Kinetic. This all had to be done through little code snippets behind customizations. That can still be done with a function where we tie a function to it to validate the data, but I would say probably use the advanced tool and just set those up. Now, these were the object properties for a text box. That text box is only one of the objects that we talked about here on the components. Each one of these is going to have its own set of properties. Give yourself some time to get more familiar. As you use like a text box, you'll know what are the capabilities. As we use a grid, as we use a combo box, each one's going to have a different set of object properties that go with it. Get familiar with looking through all of the items. As we look at the differences between 21 and 22, in 21, when you hovered over a field, in 21.1, it showed you nothing. When Andy hovered over it in 21.2, it showed you some info. When we do that now in 22, you're going to see it even gives you sample code or the syntax of how you should be typing the code if you're building a customization or you're telling bind this field to something. They're constantly enhancing the information that goes in there. Upgrade to 22 gives you the best set of info for trying to build these solutions. So different objects have different properties. A combo box, I can bind the combo box to a BAQ and have it show me the result list and what my value and member are. Can't do that on the text box because that property doesn't exist on a text box, but it does exist on a combo box. The panel grid versus a panel. The panel grid is going to throw me rows and columns automatically in there. If I set it equal to a BAQ, it's going to set it to all the fields that were in the BAQ. I can't put necessarily a BAQ into a panel. I'd have to have a grid in there and then bind the different columns to the columns in the BAQ. That would be a whole lot more work. The panel grid makes it so much easier. So my ID for my little guinea pig was number of packages. So I had a text box packages. My label was packages. I bound it to the ship needle packages. I did a right alignment. I specified 250 pixels, maximum length of 3. Because you can't enter more than 999 packages, the field has a limit in the database. So these were just the key properties that I wanted to add to my number box when I added this to the ship detail screen. When you go to save the layer, you've got to give it a name. That name is what you're going to be able to select from as long as it's published. If it's not published, it won't show up in menu maintenance as an option. The device that this is for. What device are we focusing towards? The description, why you're building this, who it's for, some basic information. Then what company is this for? If you're multi-company, you may only want this for certain sites. This information here is the base Epicor layout for layer selection. Is there anybody that's been crafty enough to go add UD fields to the layers so they can track additional info? I know there was a question earlier about how do I put this info in? How do I track this? You can customize the table that stores the fields for the layer. We have a few clients that have actually done that. And they'll put in who was the requester, the data was deployed, when was it last worked on, who was the initial developer, who was the last developer. So they know who to go back to, how to fix and maintain this quicker moving forward. Yes, you can customize the customization field. That being said, when you put those in, we'd have to turn around, modify the layer to turn around and show those. The key ones though is going to be the name, the description. If we leave the device type to any, it goes everywhere. But I could turn around and say this is only for a handheld, this is only for mobile.
Calvin, we got a question from Susan. What table would they modify for those extra fields?
I would have to go look in, but I want to say it was one of the XA tables where they stored the, if you go into solution or go to the customization maintenance in classic mode, go to field help and click on one of the fields, it'll tell you the table and field that it's storing. You can pull up that table for extended properties and then add your custom fields right there. That makes sense, Susan?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Next thing is previewing the layer. Andy showed us previewing in a web browser. It opened up a new web browser as long as he had it enabled to allow pop-ups. If pop-ups aren't allowed, you're not going to be able to preview. So there are a few settings that you have to do. If I'm in 21, when the preview pops up, it gives me this lovely little checkbox to close the preview. That's not how 22 works. So in 22, you just end up closing the window. That closes back and takes you back to the application map. If you close the window in 21, it deletes everything before it's been saved, possibly. So if you're running version 21, make sure you use the red close next to the preview when you're in preview mode. Otherwise, you may lose the work that you put into it. As Andy was showing us, inside the web browser, this is a little bit different and it's a little more normalized because a lot of the development moving forward is based on the web model, not necessarily the smart client. We just want to make sure the smart client has this as well, but save yourself some headache. If you're running any version of 21 or older, you close the preview from the X by the word preview. In 22, you can actually just close the window to go back to the application map. Always make sure that you preview your work. Make sure that it works before you try and deploy it to a menu. Make sure it functions the way you wanted it to. This will save you a little bit of headache. And as you see, my field was right aligned, so it right aligned with the invoice number, not the attribute set above it. It didn't have the exact same size. I used the size of the attribute for my 250 pixels. Probably should have made it the size of the invoice number. So these are things when you preview it, you're going to find these mistakes and want to make sure that you fix them. Again, close the screen in 22, click the little X in 21 to get out of preview mode. Once you publish that application, I can now pick it in menu maintenance as an item. If it's not published, I can't pull it in. Other things that I can do is search the application, or I can say close all the editors. Right now, you see there's an application map and a lines detail. But I could turn around and have the lines detail. I could have the header summary. I could turn around and have multiple open working on all of them at the same time. Save yourself a headache and try not to open more than 5. I find there's a little bit of a memory problem that says you're out of sync, and the only way to fix it is close everything out and kill Epicor manually. That means you lose all the work on the other tabs that you were working on in that map. If you're just doing one at a time, totally safe, doesn't seem to be a problem. It's when you start modifying 4 or 5 or more at the same time, then the system can get in a lockup and not remember where you were. Closing all editors closes everything that you had open. Verify that none are in an unsafe state, otherwise you're going to lose those. Closing the editor means throw everything away. Don't prompt me for, hey, do you want to throw this away? So just save yourself a little grief. Make sure that you don't have any work in an unsafe state. So inside the menu maintenance, inside classic mode, you had to choose a Kinetic app. You had to pick your program. That filled out the URL. Then you could go into the customization. It would pull up the list of what's available. You would select it in this lovely list box. This is what it looks like. And then you would select OK or cancel. That's how you would add it to a menu. Go ahead and save your menu. This is in the classic UI. The question came up earlier today about the Kinetic UI. And mine allowed me to turn around and have a classic program with a classic customization layer, or have a Kinetic application with a Kinetic customization, have the form to use by default is classic, but the user still gets that option. Do you want to view this in the new app, Kinetic? If they do, it's going to load the Kinetic application and customization. So I turned around and tested this earlier. I don't remember who asked the question. But in confirmation, while Andy was doing his presentation, I was trying to type this feverishly in the background, and it did work. I can open either the customized view in Kinetic that I deploy or get the classic view that I choose to deploy. The only drawback is this isn't available on the classic menu. The classic menu is not getting updated moving forward. Remember, this development stopped in 10.2.700. So whatever was available in the application then is what you're going to get. They're not putting any work into upgrading classic screens. The new Kinetic menu maintenance is going to allow you both options. Again, as I said earlier, test your customizations. Make sure that they work properly before you deploy. Not one person in this meeting room enjoys being a guinea pig for testing new software. I am sure your users are the exact same mentality. They are not happy being guinea pigs for your application development. Make sure that you test it. Not just test putting good data in, put bad data in and see if your system still allows it to continue. Don't just test in a perfect world, because your users are not going to come from that perspective. So in my example, I turned around and did a BAQ combo box that we've already seen how to tie a BAQ to it, how to specify my columns, or adding a BAQ to a grid, and Andy showed us how to throw that in there. The other one was just adding a button. That button that I turned around and put in had an event behind it. When the event had to be defined what I wanted to happen, this is very similar to a BPM, where I can drag my event objects right onto the canvas. So when the button gets clicked, what do I want it to do? When that happens, there's a true or false. Then what do I do for the true? What do I do for the false? You should make sure that all paths have an action or are handled. You don't want the application to hang on the user. Where am I for time? How am I doing, Fred?
You got about 10 minutes left total.
Okay, so I should leave a few minutes for Q&A, but extra credit, that overflow menu is the lovely new title they're calling the ellipse or the triple horizontal dots. I'm going to go with overview menu. It's kind of a quirky little title that seems to work. Upgrading a personalization into a customization is now possible. So if I have that real cool SME that turned around and personalized their screen, and we really like that, we don't have to rebuild that as a customization anymore. You can now merge and kind of promote a personalization into a layer and then deploy the layer. So it's a whole lot easier to upgrade a personalization now. That's kind of built in and is really nice. Other extra credit, a static list combo, the BAQ combo. There's also a business object combo. So if I want to call one of the Epicor business objects, I can turn around and call that and run the get by ID or the get list. Don't necessarily have to build a BAQ for it. I could just add the part list and say pull back all the purchase part types. That would be a BO combo. That's an attribute or a property that I can put on that combo box. Instead of doing a BAQ tied to it, I can do a business object. And the buttons that I talked about, you can go crazy with the buttons because the things that you can put into the event also include customizable functions that you can add to that button. So it's not just the events that they give you in the canvas, you can build your own to this. Personalizing columns and sorts you can now do in 22. So if I want to turn around and sort a column or have that column be the first one in the grid, you can now add those to it. Older versions didn't have that. This can also be saved as the layer and then deployed for everybody. The right-click navigate context menus, while they were difficult to build in 21, in 22, you will find they are more robust and there are more samples for which you can build yours off of. So if you want to build your own right-click on a part and say, hey, show me the report of where used, or show me a dashboard and pass the part number to it, you can add these context menus now moving forward. And the other fun one is Conversion Program 1080. Yes, this is not a typo. You can upgrade basic classic screens to Kinetic. I expected to hear applause on that one. Come on, this is great. If it fails, you can take a look and rerun the conversion again. So yes, Epicor is working to build converters that take my classic customization and move it over to Kinetic.
Now, would that only work with things that were like wizard driven, your row rules, those
Correct.
types of things?
You can do some basic code. So if you do a row rule, and say you went into the row rule and said, oh, I want to add these fields to the rule, you can go ahead and do that, and those will upgrade. Doing something where you added 100 lines of custom code with business object calls and adapter calls, yeah, no, that's not going to upgrade. But your basic user that just added fields to a screen, these should turn around and migrate up to Kinetic. That will solve a lot of people, maybe 50, 60% of their problem, because those screens were fairly simple. Didn't think I was going to have enough content after Andy took all my steam, but hey. Any questions on kind of intermediate Application Studio interface?
And if you've got any questions for Stump the Chump, you can type those in as well. Just prefix them with STC. Wow, Calvin, I think you either stumped the audience or they're all happy with what you did.
I'm going to go with stumped. I never go with happy people. Not seeing anything in the email world either. I figured I better check and make sure that we're not getting emailed messages. Has that happened last time? Okay, nothing in the questions box, no emails.